Okay, well, I just want to welcome you back, Eric John Phelps. Thank you for coming back and speaking with us. And of course, we're on this particular episode. It's a Syllabus Journal entry where we just kind of go through some of the historical relevancy of what's going on in the news lately. So some of the current events, what we have going on, and there's a lot. There's a lot to really talk about, and so I just wanted to get your kind of opening thoughts on what you see going on. That's relevant.
Well, the Jesuits are the great agitators of states, and they have a network that is so vast and so aghast that it's very difficult to take it in. Exactly what J. Edgar Hoover said. There's a conspiracy so vast that the average individual would never dream it so, because he was a part of it. But what I see now is I see more agitations they're saying, even some of the socialist communist Democrats are saying that Joe Biden wasn't really the president and that he really wasn't cogent at that time. So the socialist communist Democrats are making Trump look good by admitting to what he said all along. Okay, remember they both worked together. And then you have the Republicans, the leading Republicans being Roman Catholics, and they are continuing much of what they say to be truthful, but they never tell where the agitation is coming from. And so what we have now is a big deal of Trump allowing some 70 South African white people to flee the Jesuit communist state run by the African National Congress, led by a vicious, savage black named Julius Malema. I've reported on him in the fact. Is calling for the death of all white people in South Africa, and they just passed a statute calling for the taking of the land of the white people without paying them for it. And remember that there were no blacks in South Africa. South Africa had been founded 100 years before the United States. There were no blacks there. The white Protestants, the French, the Germans, the Dutch were fleeing Europe during right after the 30 Years' War. And they settled in what would become South Africa. South Africa was uninhabited. There were no blacks living there. They didn't steal any land from them. That's all a lie. And the blacks that are in South Africa came from other African nations to settle there because they had more wealth and prosperity than any other nation in Africa. So what we have now is the Jesuits destroying the Protestant Reformation out of South Africa by destroying the last of these Afrikaners. And Trump has rightfully called the black savage president of South Africa on the carpet for this, because he should have done something long ago. But he's part of the African National Congress. He's part of the destruction. And so he has this great big black savage that he is interviewing at the White House and pointing out the sins of his country, of his government, that is calling for the destruction of the white people, with Julius Malema leading a whole stadium of these savages, calling for death to the Boers. And we're going to have killing and a revolution. And this black president doesn't wince. He's not apologetic for one thing. He knows all about it. Trump raises all these recently murdered white farmers, and he doesn't say anything about it, acts like he doesn't know anything, the black savage president of South Africa. And so I'm glad that Trump brought it to the forefront of the people of this country now, because they have no idea of the horrible, terrible things these black savages have done to the white people there. And I'll give you some examples. One of the things they've done to these Dutch Boers, these Protestants, is they go to their farms and they capture them. Then these black savages take turns raping the white women. There was always got to have some white vagina, okay? And then after they're finished raping them, they put oil on them, olive oil or some kind of oil, and they heat up an iron from an ironing board, and they iron that woman's skin. They burn her every pore of her body so that she must die. So it's a long, savage torture after they've taken turns raping her. They've done that many times to the white South Africans. That's a fact, and I can prove it. Another thing they do is there was a leader of the South Africans there. His name was Eugene Terreblanche, Blank, and the way they killed him was they macheted him to death, and then after they cut him up with a machete, they pulled down his pants, and several of them masturbated and ejaculated their semen on his genitalia. That's what these savages did to Eugene Terreblanche, and nobody wants to talk about it.
What was the significance of doing such a reprobate kind of act? Was it
because
something
it's
to their
a humiliation.
Culture? Okay.
Because everything about these blacks is the penis, about the vagina. They're making war with their penises. And so it's a savage insult to the white people of South Africa to do that to him, because they're going out there and the reproduction of whites in South Africa and to stop it. That's why they did that.
Right, I gotcha. Okay. It's highly symbolic. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what they have been doing. They've killed thousands of farmers. They have crosses up where they murdered them. Women, children, real brave, you know. And so the white South Africans have had to be armed, and they have to be armed at all times on their farms, lest these savages of the African National Congress come out and kill them, and take their farms. So,
what I was going to just interject, from what I heard about the Afrikaners, is that they, as far as being Christian settlers, having been there for generations, that they're not unlike Amish people. That's what I heard about describing their character.
Well, all we want to remember is, they have a very high character. They're very moral
as far
people.
As the Boers and the farmers there that are the South Africans.
And they're not Christians per se. They're Protestants and Baptists. They're not Catholic. The Afrikaners were not Roman Catholic. They were escaping the savage Catholic butchery of the 30 Years' War and other subsequent things in the 1600s, and that's why they fled down there.
So this President Ramaphosa, or whatever his name is, he's tied really tightly with Soros and the World Economic Forum and these globalists. So he's in a bad position with these tariffs and this new order of the economic situation in the world. He's in a that's why he has to show up and kiss the ring in Washington D.C. in the first place, I think.
Well, this black leader of South Africa?
Yeah, I think he's coming because he has to do something to try to. He addressed it several times. He wants to refocus the questioning constantly about economic reforms.
Yeah,
that's what he wants to talk about. So he obviously is over the barrel.
Yeah, we need your money, white man, because we can't produce anything ourselves. That's the problem. Black nations don't produce anything unless they're overseen and guided by white people, and that's a fact. I like what Jesse Lee Peterson says, the white man builds them and the black man destroys them. So they're there begging for money.
You were going to talk about Rhodesia. Go ahead. I don't want to distract you. Go back to Rhodesia there.
Yeah. Rhodesia, a.k.a. Zimbabwe, formerly run by Robert Mugabe, that savage, who was advised by a black Jesuit priest in the killing off of the white farmers of Zimbabwe. And then we're going to take their tractors and all that stuff. Why do they do it? These blacks can't manage the farms. They're going to steal the tractors and do all this, and so that they have no more food production, so the people in Zimbabwe are starving. And that's the blacks are starving in Zimbabwe as a result of the political black party of the Jesuits running Zimbabwe. And it's the same exact thing they have for South Africa. And remember, South Africa and the previous leaders like Nelson Mandela, that awful, wicked sinner who killed 40,000 of his own black South Africans to drive them either to the African National Congress or to kill them. And many of them were black Christian men believing the Bible. They make a hero out of Mandela. And he was the Knight of Malta, along with Mbushi, or the guy who followed him. The Knights of Malta, knighted by the Queen of England, that witch, thank God she's gone, ran South Africa into the ground and destroyed the whites. And one more thing we want to remember is, how did South Africa fall? It fell because of a Jesuit-educated, Jesuit of the short robe, Billy Boy Clinton, when he put a embargo on South Africa. That ruined South Africa. This military government in Washington, run by the Knights and using Jesuit coadjutors, ruined white Protestant South Africa. And so that's what the South Africans are doing now. They're fleeing. And they have another guy. He's the CEO of Orangian. What's the name of that new country they're building there? Something like that. Anyway, he's the CEO. And as soon as I heard that, I know absolutely it can never succeed, because the reason why Jamestown did not succeed was because it was a commercial operation. And the reason why Plymouth Rock succeeded was because it was based on Bible-believing people, the Puritans coming there to flee persecution. They succeeded, and Jamestown did not. And so this Orangia is never going to succeed because it's a commercial operation. It should be set up on biblical religious principles first, seeking God that he would deliver them from the massacre that they're facing. But they're not going to be delivered because it is commercial. The guy that's the head of...
And so it should be based on meritocracy, which is the fundamental thing that was happening at Plymouth Rock, too.
Well, it should be based on, here we're Bible-believing white men of God. We want to preserve our race, language, and culture. We're going to trust God that he will preserve us. But if we're just going to separate and start another area, another country out of South Africa, I mean, we're still paying the taxes, of course. It can never succeed, but because it's commerce. You've always got to separate commerce from the service of the Lord and the church. Always. It can never be united.
Absolutely, and I agree totally. I wondered about the pressures that were going on in the background here in American culture and society, because there's a couple points here where there's been like some tension in America, and the South African president is one of them. It was also an issue that we noticed on X, or on the social media, where there was a girl, a young woman. She's a white woman, or European descent, if you will.
She call her white woman.
She has her son there, and she sees a boy. A boy is a black boy goes through her purse on the bench or a park bench or what have you, and she goes and just lets it fly and calls him the N-word, right? And then somebody tries to film it and tries to bust her down using the word. The
and
unspeakable.
who was filming her? Who was filming her?
And I assume another black individual
some black Muslim, some black foreigner.
Somebody who thought that they could take advantage. Oh, you say that word? Like, that's like,
Yeah.
And so she just let him have it too. So she goes and raises $800,000. I have to go check, but $800,000 on Give, Send, Go from people who are supporting her because her family is basically being endangered.
And because the white people of this country have had enough of the kissing the rear end of the black man, of always kowtowing to him, never reporting black on white crime that occurs every day in the thousands, and always being put a guilt trip on white people because we're white and we have white privilege day in and day out, and the white people are sick of it. And now the Jesuits have what they want. They got a white backlash. The problem is the whites in the backlash don't believe the Bible, and they don't know true history. So they're going to be sucked into the new right. And you put these angry white men in a uniform with a gun, and you are going to have an unbelievable result of mass execution, murder, and you name it. And it's all going to be vengeance on what the majority savage blacks have done to us for the last 60 years.
Yeah, there's a high propensity of families that are like still, especially here in the South, where where I work a lot here and throughout Florida and in the southern states here, and I see a lot of black churches and a lot of like highly civilized, highly organized black families who are taking great care to make sure their kids are being raised well, and they're taking great care to tend after their churches and to be in church and to be Bible believing Christians and to have families. And and to do what they're doing in a really righteous way, and then those people are ultimately right. They're ultimately like the father.
Yeah, I was dear friends with two civil blacks when I was in the Air Force: Chuck Davis and Steve Palmer. Chuck was from Arkansas. Steve was from South Carolina. Two of the dearest men you'd ever want to meet. Knew the Lord, raised by godly people. And they didn't have anything to do with these savage blacks in the Air Force doing the DAP and doing that constant thing of walking around being arrogant, cutting in the chow hall lines. They had nothing to do with that. And we used to eat lunch together. And my white friends used to say to them, we like Chuck and Steve. They're not like the rest of them. I said, no, they're not. So we always have to distinguish between the minority civil blacks, who are Christian men and women, versus the majority savage blacks who hate all white people and are looking just for the opportunity to rob, cheat, steal, or rape us whenever they got the opportunity. And it's never reported.
Yeah, this kind of criminal culture has been brought to like a state of the art through Hollywood and through the record labels and through I was going to ask you about the CIA creation of gangster rap, but that's been an issue. That's been people have been talking about that.
No doubt.
So.
I got an email from one of my supporters, Butch Hogan. He's one of my students. He's a black gentleman, and he talked about the CIA creating the gangster rap. So what's that about? Why is the Jesuit order CIA creating gangster rap?
And is it? And how bad is it? I guess is the question for black people, if that's the term.
Terrible.
They say black people, quote
It's
unquote.
destroyed their culture. It's destroyed them, and any responsible black Christian man does not allow his children to listen to that stuff. It's evil, it's savage, but it's designed to drive the blacks into this country into savagery. And that'll be the perfect crucible to incite an open race war. Look at what that Kanye West is doing now. That's savage. He has a video out with 4 rows of these savage blacks. It's in the dark. And they have these animal skins around them. They have a baboon skull, stuffed baboons, and they have this hateful, awful look. And what they're doing is they're chanting, "Niggas, Heil Hitler! Niggas, Heil Hitler! Niggas, Heil Hitler!" over and over and over again. So now the Jesuits and their black Freemasons are radicalizing the blacks to go after the Jews. And that will unite with the Ku Klux Klan and all the other Jew-baiters, because remember, Malcolm X went to a meeting of the Ku Klux, of the Nation of Islam, and he saw the high leaders of Islam, of the nation of high leaders of the Ku Klux Klan there. And he said, well, it looks to me like the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan have the same paymasters. And when he said that, that was the end of Malcolm.
Yeah, I think that with that, I like to keep my ear to the ground, but I did not hear about this particular song, but I guess I did. I guess I kind of understand the context. And Kanye, of course, is really interested in like word power, and both of those little phrases or words are very like awful and horrible and powerful words within our culture and within our minds, within the English language, right, in the context. And so, of course, it's very demoralizing and degrading, obviously. And I'm looking at the other issue is between this the clash that's taking place between this murdered track star. I guess there was a young man who I guess they had an altercation.
Oh yeah, the savage black there in Texas. I guess they were having words or something.
Yeah,
because he just didn't like them for nothing. They were having words.
Apparently, the kid was the kid who died. Apparently, was really excellent track runner. That's what I get.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a Christian man. He came from a Christian family, reading the Bible, and so this savage, instead of fighting or whatever, pulls out a knife and stabs him through the heart. Well, that's murder. That's first-degree murder. He needs to be executed. Period. But oh no, we're going to cudgel him, and he was just defending himself. And now, you know what the Masonic Lodge in Texas did? The Black Masons and the other White Masons? They let that kid graduate from high school instead of sitting in jail waiting for his trial for first-degree murder with no bail. Oh no, they let him graduate to further enrage the white people.
I wanted to talk about the underlying agitation there, because the families. I guess the family of the boy who was murdered are basically being targeted, and I guess they got swatted several times, and there are other various altercations out in front of their house, and so they're basically being attacked and basically being targeted, and God knows what will happen if they don't get out of sight.
And you know what? If we had any cops, if we had any real police, they'd be going out and making their arrests. And if any of those savages drew a gun or whatever, you shoot them right on the spot.
Any real police, any real law enforcement, even from the next county over.
Any real law enforcement.
Yeah, from the next county over, anyone would take interest in this.
I'm going to tell you something that's similar to this. My father was a chief of police, and there was a black policeman that had been killed by some savage black, and they were having the funeral for that black policeman, who was a decent man. And here come these savage blacks. Right. And they came to the funeral and said, "You ain't got nothing but a nigger in that casket. Just nothing but a nigger in there." And they knocked down his father, punched him a few times, and so his father got up.
Well, you know what, Eric? Not to interrupt, but nowadays the typical thing you'll see is people going ahead and just shooting up more of the family members at the funeral. So you have to have security on family. But go ahead and carry on.
His father got in his car and he left. And his wife went up to those black savages and told them, you better be gone when he comes back.
Right.
You better be gone when he comes back, because he's going to have his guns, and he's going to kill all of you. And they believed her, and they got out of there. And I think that's great. And in fact, if he'd have come back and shot and killed every one of them, he never should be prosecuted for anything. A funeral is a sacred event. And you want to come there and raise Cain and insult the man who's being buried, you better get ready to die, as far as I'm concerned. So we have to go back to, hey man, a armed populace is a respectful populace, and when you do that and trespass, there is going to be guns. There's going to be problems, and the cops can arrest the ones who started, not everybody in general. And anybody who calls for a gun control law, you take them out, and they're convicted of high treason, and you shoot them. I don't want to hear anything more about gun control.
It's conspiracy against rights, is gun control.
That's right. It's conspiracy to read the Bible, conspiracy to defend yourself while you're reading the Bible and serving God. That's all it is, and it's Jesuitical and Masonic.
Yeah, no, I think that the emotions are running very high in a situation like that. There's no telling what can happen, and people are being very civilized. They're getting together. They're carrying their loved one, and it's a situation where everyone is going to, step aside, and so anyone who interrupts that, there's no telling what could happen, and you're taking your life in your own hands. Same thing with marriages. If you go in and get involved with people's in between a married couple, and something happens to you, then you shouldn't have been involved there. That was your fault, your mistake.
Well, that's right.
That's how it should be.
That's exactly how it should be. Bye-bye.
That's how it always had been before, in recorded history, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, it used to be. Mm-hmm. Well, we just have a country that doesn't punish crime anymore. We have preachers that don't preach against sin anymore. That's what we have. And so therefore we have a wild culture now with nothing to set it back. And also because we've departed from the Reformation King James Bible of 1769. You depart from that book and your culture goes right to hell.
Yeah, we're going to just point out that as far as the Knights of Malta and the organization and the larger international institution that is the nation of Malta, I guess if you want to think about the larger context of the United Nations and having a seat and a place on the map, the island of the city of Malta, they would have their own passports and their own kind of governance, and what's really interesting for people who want to research is where the hospitals, because the Maltese hospitals are very elaborate and sophisticated and state of the art, and they're at the most interesting places in the world. I'll have to go fact check myself and go look, but I think there's one near Jordan, and they're in the most interesting places in the world that you could possibly imagine. I almost think of a Mission Impossible movie when I think of all the places where the Maltese hospitals are, and you have to think about the hospital system itself is ultimately an outgrowth of the practice of the Hospitaller Knights. And so the Hospitaller Knights were always...
It's during the Crusades when they found them, where the Crusaders could go and die. That's why we have what's called hospice. It comes from the Hospitallers, preparing you for death. So the Knights of Malta had their hospitals, which are really military fortresses, in their international empire of acquiring land and money for the benefit of the papacy. Remember, the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta is a cardinal. He has the status of a cardinal. And he was relieved of his command by the Jesuit Pope. The English head of the Knights of Malta was relieved, and they put some other guy in the head.
Yeah,
so
it was
the
Matt
Jesuits
Festing, I think.
subdued the Knights of Malta. Yep.
And it's very interesting, and I think that they, as far as being in the situation as having a seat as a cardinal, would you say that they also are going to vote in the Curia when they are going to elect a new pope? They're also there voting in that kind of situation?
I'm not sure. I know all the cardinals don't participate if they're over a certain age, but it wouldn't surprise me that they would. But again, just remember this. The Jesuits are in control of any re-electing or reappointing of a pope, because they totally controlled the papacy since Vatican I of 1870, when they were behind the conspiracy to have the Pope of Rome declared to be infallible. And when they did that, they made the entire sovereign state of Vatican City and the Vatican World Empire subject to the will of one man, the Pope. And all they have to do to control that empire is to control the Pope. And that's exactly what they've done.
No, I think you're totally right. I think that at this point they've built this institution, and their entire cause for existing is designed to support and maintain the permanent growth and conquest of this institution. So it's on a mission of world conquest. It's like the Quran.
Oh yeah.
The Quran and the Surahs are a blueprint for world domination, for a military world domination.
Well, it's the long arm of the church. As you know, the papacy created Islam in the 6th century to crush out Bible-believing Jews and Arabs in the Middle East, and they succeeded in that for the most part.
No, I think they're still succeeding with it, but I think ultimately Islam becomes its own kind of egregore. It becomes its own kind of spiritual entity, and it has its own kind of demonic forces behind it that are being fed by the conditioning. It reminds me of Moloch, the idea that ultimately the same spiritual energy that is kind of inhabiting Islam and the minds of Islamic, participants in that kind of demonic devotional, if you will, or ultimately it reminds me of worshiping Moloch. It's the same kind of universalism. Yeah, you had to give, you would die if you didn't participate in it. Ultimately, you had to give your children to it. And so
Islam
they love to give their children to it. Islam does the same thing because it offers up its children to be like martyrs, and so that's what they instill in their young, not soccer or reading, but go blow yourself up, right?
Yeah, the Islam is nothing more than the opposite number of Romanism. Islam has this language of Arabic. Romanism has its language of Latin. Islam has its center city, Mecca. Rome has its center city. Papacy has center city in Rome. Islam has jihads. Rome has crusades. I mean, it's identical. It's the same entity with two separate faces, and the Jesuit at the top controls them both.
Right. Now, I had this model in Revelation where I was looking at I know some people, in some instances, you were talking about the false prophet, but I look at the false prophet, and it looks emblematic to me like the rise of Islam, which is ultimately a false prophet. They brand themselves to be the fifth prophet or the final prophet of history, and they ultimately brand themselves to be followers, and they're all just little carbon copies of the same kind of ideology. So they're just, as much as they can be, whether they're Sunni or Muslim, as much as they can be within the model of what they believe, they try to emulate Muhammad. They try to look like him, they try to act like him, they try to rule under his Sharia law, and so that's their highest archetype of a human, is to be this guy, So I think ultimately,
right. But remember, the false prophet of Revelation 13 is a Jew. He will oversee the third Hebrew temple. To do that, he has to be a racial Jew, but he will be serving a white Gentile, which will be the final Pope of Rome, slain with a sword and risen from the dead.
He partners with the Antichrist system, but Islam is there in that context I think you're looking at, as far as you're seeing it as a false prophet in the Jewish context of being a prophet of God who's false. But in this context, it is a false prophet, but it's a whole other idolatrous system of basically demon worship, because they have to have blood, got to have slavery, got to have beheading. And if you look at the book Kingdom of Darkness, it just talks about how many people they would ride out on their camels, the Ikwan killers, the killer squads, and they would just find little villages or little cities and they would just behead 10,000 people, and that's the kind of stuff they would do.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. The blacks have suffered terribly under the religion of Islam. They were the great slave traders. They go on their slave hunts. You can read about this in The History of Slavery and the Slave Trade by W.O. Blake. They would have, and the big slaver leader out of Egypt was Muhammad Ali. That was his name. Muhammad Ali was the king slaver of rounding up the blacks, taking them either to Cairo or Istanbul and selling them at the slave markets. And Islam has treated the blacks horribly.
So that's terribly. Basically an inside joke, basically, is what you're looking at when you think about Muhammad Ali.
That's right. That's right. When
it's funny to someone who knows.
When the leader of the Nation of Islam gave Cassius Clay his name, it was the joke's on him. Yep. When Elijah Muhammad did that, the joke was on Cassius Clay, who later would betray Malcolm and sell him down the river.
ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you guys have to check out ForgottenBooks.com. It's just a really wonderful outlet. Forgotten Books is a London-based book publisher specializing in the restoration of old books, both fiction and nonfiction manuscripts that are hard to find, almost forgotten and lost to modernity, right? So we have some really incredible books here on ForgottenBooks.com. And as we look through, I'm just looking through some of the headlines here. And it's incredible. Like I can see here that a lot of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's books are here. So I could see studies by Malachi Taylor on Ephesians. Fascinating. I can see here an essay on church government by an unknown author, right? As I go through here, over 1.3 million forgotten or lost or all but lost books, right? The history of the so-called Jansenist Church of Holland, the moral concordances of St. Anthony of Padua, right? All this incredible books, guys. All these incredible forgotten books. A sermon on the death of Abraham Lincoln, right? This is incredible. This is an incredible resource. The secret instructions of the Jesuits, right? All these. ISIS Unveiled. Wow, this is incredible. ISIS Unveiled right here on ForgottenBooks.com. Guys, you got to come check it out. Now, when you look at Benjamin Netanyahu over in Israel, like, how do you view this character? Is he a World Economic Forum globalist insider?
Of course. Every leader of the government of Israel has been, to a large extent, controlled by the Pope of Rome. And if he steps out of line, they get rid of him. Like Yitzhak Rabin, they'll assassinate him. But the Pope's Masonic Jewish Labor Zionist government of Israel is not there for the benefit of the Jews living in Israel. It's there for the benefit of the Pope and to continue the agitation there with the AKA Palestinians, which are really Muslim Arabs. So that's what Netanyahu was a part of. Netanyahu was a part of the attack on those 1,300 Jewish people by the savage Hamas Muslims because he was working with Qatar and had given them $30 million, according to a documentary put out by some Israelis on Netanyahu. So he was part of it. And it makes perfect sense because this was all set up by Ariel Sharon in 2005 when he gives Gaza to the Muslims, betraying the Jewish people and kicking the settlers out. Barry Chambers told me all about that, and he has a couple books on it. Bye Bye Gaza is one of them. And so it's a deliberate agitation to keep the agitation going until the final Pope of Rome comes to power with the beginning of Daniel's 70th week. And he'll bring peace to the Middle East, and he'll be the hero.
Well, as revolting as it is, we have to bring up, I'm going to do quotation marks with my fingers, P. Diddy. And P. Diddy is finally in prison, and there's plenty of other that probably should be as well, but at least we got this guy in prison. And he was a terrible and horrible, depraved, monstrous, like rapist, kind of sinister, like drug rapist kind of guy. And he'd have these parties, and he would ultimately kind of pull the stuff. I think he realized what was being, this is my kind of like little thesis, like I think ultimately what was done to him to entrap him, maybe by, in my opinion, maybe Oprah or who knows, right? He realized that he would do the same thing, and he would have these parties and get people to do awful things, and he would have them blackmailed, right, to kind of cut to the chase. And so finally we're in this situation where he's kind of going down, and it's kind of, it kind of ties in, him going down, and the whole thing ties into this kind of like simmering push, like rush the lemmings towards race war, and kind of and a hatred, kind of bringing the South African president forward, having P. Diddy in there with a song by Kanye West, which is like absolutely prescient.
Yeah, great observation. This is all designed to dovetail into the synthesis they want to bring here. Absolutely. And they can't bring it about without Freemasons. The George Floyd bit, Black Lives Matter, just another huge agitation incited by the Jesuits and their black Freemasons. As I've said, Floyd was never in that casket. If he'd have been in the casket, they'd have kept it open. Right. They could have that much more propaganda.
You always did say that. That's the record. I'll admit that. That's you challenged that right from the get-go. But no one pushed his dad over during the funeral, right? So that was good.
That's right. And now they want to give this cop that was a part of the Masonic Rite, putting the knee on the neck, they want to give him a release.
Oh, I
they
should
want
write
to
that
release
one down. Oh, dang
and
it.
all
Got
sorts
me.
of black rage. Oh, yeah, that's just exactly what the Jesuits want.
So that's masterful right there. They bring him out, right? And of course, I don't know what was going on there. Obviously, you had this whole thesis that they were just screwing around and there was just like something going on between these individuals who apparently knew each other, which I'm amazed at how like deep the whole conspiracy goes. But apparently the guy who died, the George Floyd, God bless his soul.
He didn't die. The one they said.
Right, but they played this game of basically like knocking him out and just.
It was a Masonic rite, Sean.
Right. No, go ahead and explain that.
The three ruffians. It's in the Masonic Rite of the third degree, and so they have to go through the rite, and they hit you over the head with the mallet, and then they bring you back to life. And the Masonic, the head of the worshipful master of the lodge, gives you the lion's grip and whispers "Maha" bone in your ear, and all of a sudden you come back to life. It was a Masonic ritual that George Floyd was a part of.
Gotcha.
3 of them. Yep.
I think that's going to be further to be proved out as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of interesting point, though, is that the Epstein suicide situation. It was strange how Dan Bongino and Kash Patel came out and sat kind of awkwardly and kind of uncomfortably and said that it was just
they showed their real colors, didn't they?
Well, what do you think? How do you read that? Are they just kind of like keeping their cards really close to the chest, or what do you think is going on there?
No, because if they come out and
they don't owe us an automatic answer. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, if they come out and say that Epstein was killed, which they know he was, then that will demand an investigation, and Trump will be required to give an investigation because these two guys are in his government. So therefore, it's going to be investigated. If it goes investigation, now they're going to discover all the people that went to that island, and guess who was there? Donald Trump.
Well, that's another question we're ultimately going to get to, not to kind of get too close to the third rail, but he was in Epstein's Black Book there, which is kind of Diddy just seems like another Epstein kind of like how they deal with you kind of operation, you know. And apparently Justin Bieber, he escapes with his life apparently, but he was under. I guess it also reminds me too that apparently the two princes, the two young. I don't want to say they're Harry and but at some point they went to one of these things apparently where some more is kind of coming out about that. So who knows how they were treated?
Yep. It's just one huge cesspool of sin of all these people in the limelight,
right?
Entertainment, in arts, and politics, sports. They're all in it together, and very few are honest.
No,
I
think this is the conviction of the age. I think this is basically the indictment of the age with all this. And all these different actresses or whoever, these people who were basically involved with it, who were basically victimized by it, but then also went along with victimizing others just so they could, right? And they never, they were all quiet. So it was just a horrible, it's just, anyway, not to belabor that too much, but.
Yep. Well, Diddy, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to him.
I wonder if he's going to get dropped on his neck too, and then it was just an accident, kind of thing.
That's right.
He seems like he's ready to run his mouth off, boy.
I'm sure he is.
I don't want to hear anything. You guys tell me what he says. I don't want to hear anything else from it.
Yeah. Well, I guess Michael Jackson told this one woman that knew Diddy, he said, Diddy's going to kill you too. Or was it Prince that said that? Diddy's going to kill you too. So there's the very high possibility that he had a hand in the death of Jackson because Jackson was killed by his Masonic black doctor.
And Prince. Remember Prince? He went up his elevator and...
Yep.
So that's what happens when you associate with the wrong people.
Because Prince got the title to all of his songs. He got the rights to all of his songs. Well, he can't do that now with the Pope's white power structure, so bye-bye to Prince.
Now, as I turn over here just to do, a little mini commercial for Citizen Free Press. I like to look at Citizen Free Press a lot, and I'm looking over here, and apparently there was a couple who was diplomats who were, I guess a young, not even yet married, a Jewish couple who were in Washington, D.C., and they were assassinated by this lunatic. And so, and I have this article here, Muslims celebrate the murder of the Jewish couple. So that's happening.
Yeah. They did that yesterday evening, I believe. So they get a lot of mileage out of that. And furthermore, they're going to commit more crimes against the Jews here to drive those who can leave out of here back to Israel. So the ones that are left over can be blamed for running the country, and the Jews run the world. All the Muslim world believes the Jews run America. So they can be blamed for it and ultimately rounded up by the new right and go to the camps.
Breaking, it says, this might be a little bit old too. Breaking, Harvard loses authorization to enroll international students. So I love that. That says that they should probably did this like 50 years ago, but at least.
Well, furthermore, why would Harvard be given any money by the government? Why would the government give any money to any academic institution? Let them rise or fall on their own merits, depending on which students want to go there for an education or not. None of these institutions need to be funded. That's part of the communistic mentality of the emergency war powers military government. We've got to make communists out of all these Americans, out of the cream of the crop who go to these Ivy League schools.
No, I think that's absolutely right. That's how probably that's the only kind of logical, sensible way to handle it. Now, as just a point here, I had to write a letter to an individual recently over at InfoWars, if you will, and it was regarding Ignatius Loyola, like dealing with the whole subject of the papacy and all this kind of stuff going on, and talked about Ignatius Loyola and describing him as a Jew. And of course, this has been in like Jim Marr's books, so the way they describe this kind of face of the world conspiracy and how it looks, and then they describe how it's really a Jewish world conspiracy. And of course, Ignatius Loyola is a Jew. What do you say to that? We've talked about this before, but this is a very important point.
I prove he was not a Jew in my book. He was a royal Spanish Basque, and not one Jewish drop of blood in his body. He did have associates that were Jews, like Diego Garcia. He was the third Jesuit general, Diego Lainez. And then there was this Polanco, who was one of his subordinates. He was a Jew, but in 1593, you can read this in Lacouture's The Jesuits. The Jesuits, or the heads, expelled all the Jews out of the Jesuit order, and from 1593 to 1946, no Jew could be a member of the Jesuit order.
Yeah, this is an important point. Yeah, go ahead.
You can read more about that in the book Rome Stoops to Conquer by an ex-Jesuit, E. Boyd Barrett. But the Jesuits have no concern whatsoever for a Jew. And the Jews were not allowed in the order when the book was written in 1931. So, no, they hate the Jews, and they're going to blame the Jews for all the problems. That's what the John Birch Society did. They blamed the Jews. That's what Gary Allen did in his book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, where he quoted the Jesuit general at the time, Pedro Rupe, talking about this conspiracy and whatever. But they blamed the Jews, and they didn't blame the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were running the John Birch Society.
No, it comes back to this under the current there, behind the scenes. You can see this kind of continuous thread of constant disinformation and dialectical warfare, where they're trying to ultimately attack the Jews. It's this replacement theology. That's another connection that Romanism has with Islamism, is that, or Mohammedanism, if you want, is that they're ultimately trying to do everything they can at every minute to hate the Jews, to point the, to try to attack them, and even if they are being moderate and they're stepping back from it and they don't practice it in their way of life, and they're more civilized people, it's still in their books, and they can ignore that part if they want, but it's in there,
Yeah, but just remember, Loyola was no Jew.
Right.
I completely disproved that in my book. Guys tell me that, and I had to disprove that because that was a typical lie and misdirection. To say that the Jews run the world through the Jesuit order, give me a break. That is completely in antithesis to what Christ said in Luke, when he said that Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, which is the second coming of Christ. So up to the second coming, Jerusalem is run by Gentiles. No Jews have ever run Jerusalem since the diaspora, really since Nebuchadnezzar when he took the city. So
they got Jews sent back after the fall of Babylon. Cyrus the Great ultimately is going to send Jews back to rebuild the wall, rebuild the city, and they're going to reoccupy the land. But it's never going to be. It's just going to be the Jews alone. It's never going to be how it was the 10 tribes and how it was the great nation of Israel.
Yeah, it will always be a subjugated nation during the diaspora. And the Jews will always be ruled, whether it's by the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans.
Or the city of London.
And see, that's when Christ came, it was such a huge day for the Jews looking for redemption. Redemption means they were looking for being released from the Roman lash, from the power of the Caesar. And they knew that if there was national repentance, he'd have killed the Caesar, he'd have ended the Roman Empire, and he would have established the throne of David, and there would have been the kingdom of David ruling the world from his time forward. That's why he weeps when he rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, and he says, "Oh, if you'd have known the peace that's due unto thee this thy day, but now it's hidden from your eyes." No, so I think the geopolitical offer of a kingdom based on national repentance, and they rejected it.
No, I think ultimately it reminds me of the fact that they were released during the time of their enslavement in Egypt, during the period where Passover was set up, and now ultimately Jesus Christ is our Passover lamb, and he's the Passover lamb of Israel too. And so I think as we go forward in time, that will become more and more borne out to be the truth as we approach the way that the future is going to break down. As far as we can predict through the scriptures, God is going to keep his word, and he's going to do the things and the pronouncements that are written there. So it's quite a terrible time, that the 42 months of tribulation, etc. But this point in history in 1593, the blood purity laws, this is important because this is the point where the inner core of the movement within Jesuitism is going to decide that they hate Jews, right? You know what I mean? And they're going to make sure that Jews never ever get inside where their inner core, where their command structure is at. And so that wasn't always the case. There was a Jewish.
Just hold just a second. Let me prove that. Just remember the book. It's the Secret War Against the Jews by John Loftus. And he tells you in that, he's an Irish Catholic educated by Jesuits at Boston College. He'll tell you that in the NSA, there's what's called the Jew room. And no American Jew is allowed to enter that room, showing you the NSA is not run by Jews. It's run by Jesuits and the High Knights of Malta and other Gentiles.
And so it's compartmentalization. So they're ultimately they're not allowed in the inner core of the intelligence community either, is what you're saying.
That's correct. Not in the inner core. Just like the Jews are not in the inner core of the mafia.
Right.
Meyer Lansky didn't run anything, but Sam Giancana did, and the others. You had to be Sicilian. It's a racial matter. So the Jews cannot be in the inner sanctum of the commission or the other high mafiosos that run things. They're the best bookkeepers, and they oversee their business, but they're not rulers. The Jews are not rulers in any major political power. They're just lackeys, like Kissinger and Michael Bloomberg and a host of them, all the 300 of them in the Council on Foreign Relations.
But they're positioned there ultimately to be figureheads in those positions by which they can try to evince this idea across the left, the extreme left, and the extreme right, that there is this Jewish world conspiracy and that the real talk. And so that's kind of like what's happening in the background of this thesis.
That's right. That's right. Remember, there's a book called The Crisis, The Enemies of America Unmasked, written by Wayne Lawrence in 1855. And one of the maxims he puts in his book is extremes meet. Extremes meet. And that's exactly what we have. The extremes of communism and fascism and labor Zionism and Islam at the top, they all meet and work together, subject to the Pope of Rome.
Well, I really kind of want to get into that topic of just for a few minutes about the topic of Christian Zionism and this idea that ultimately I think that people are, trying to support what they look as the remnant people of Israel, the biblical Israel. And then you have this, which we've talked about before, this background kind of ideology in play, which is this false disinformation kind of continuous psyop from history that you'll see, like the learned elders of Zion, and also the idea that ultimately the Jews are just Khazarians, right? They're not really real Jews anymore. So when you see people who have Jewish heritage and Jewish ancestry and Jewish faith, it's really just Khazarians, and so it kind of goes to this minimalization.
And if you read the book, The 13th Tribe by Kessler and the Jews of Khazaria by Kevin Allen Brook, they want to tell you that the Jewish race is gone.
Right.
Of course, the guy who wrote the 13th Tribe, Kessler, he was British intelligence. So they want to make you believe that the Jews, the real Jews of the past, are gone. They've been miscegenated, and all we have now is a bunch of Khazars. And that's totally a lie. And when you do that, you open yourself up for the curse of the Abrahamic covenant. You start persecuting these racial people that you think are Khazars, and they really are, in fact, racial Hebrew Jewish Israelites from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you're going to get cursed in your physical life through that Abrahamic covenant.
No, I believe you. Like, I understand that context biblically in a clear way. And so I think that there's also the context that the God's sovereignty and his word and his sacred covenant with Israel is like prominent and everlasting, and it's not movable. It doesn't change. The work of Christ comes on Calvary, and it doesn't change God's covenant. He even says he fulfills it. So I think that there's all this replacement theology going on with Romanism and also kind of modern churchianity, where they kind of lose their place in history, or like their like reason for existing, because they start to supplant Israel with their own need to be religious, or their own kind of like religious kind of doxology, or whatever it is.
Dead, worthless Christianity.
Islam doesn't like mess around. They're like right up front about it. So
dead, worthless Christianity, and the Lord uses Islam to destroy it.
Right.
That's what he did to Orthodoxy when the fall of Constantinople takes place in 1453. You had an apostate Christianity there that would have become Romanized, and so the Lord brought in the Muslims and took Constantinople and killed a whole bunch of people and continued with their jihads. That's why they're here. It's because the Lord has brought in Islam in this country to be used by Satan to kill the apostate Christian church in this country. And they're going to do it because the military government's going to facilitate it.
Yeah, no, I wanted to discuss more with you about this idea going forward that we're furthering the military government in America with the Trump, which I support. I have to go when you put a gun to my head and I have to pick between Kamala Harris and Trump, then obviously any sane person, which is the whole point. And so now
right.
Trump has like superpower because I love the man, but I have questions about. They even took like a special picture of the bullet, which is really hard to take a picture of a bullet, Eric, which I'm sure you can imagine.
You can't take a picture of a moving bullet like that. That's ridiculous.
But we have one there, and so he's famous for that.
Yeah,
maybe it's technology. Maybe it's like high bullet technology. Like we can shoot a bullet and shoot a hair off your head with a bullet, but we won't kill you. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's no photographer there with high-speed photography that's there without knowing what they're going to be doing to take that picture. It was all a black op. Trump was never shot. That's all bogus. But that created all sorts of sympathy for him. After the Secret Service agent put that little blood in his ear, it made it look like he was shot. And by the way, the woman that was there in the Secret Service, she's Russian. She's Russian, and she had been part of the KGB. Yeah.
Well, there's quite a little famous part in our series of discussions here where you're out and you're like, and this is pretty early on. It goes pretty far back. I'll have to go back and check. I'll have AI look it up for me. But you basically what you do is you say the individuals in the involved with the Epstein case who are high up will never ever be exposed. It's never going to happen. And you say that just point blank.
The men of power in the Epstein matter will never be exposed because I will tell you his execution or his murder was an order from on high, from the president. And they carried it out through their secret societies and nobody's talking.
Well, it's interesting how the presidential elections were always set up in a weird dialectic. You had the skull and bones presidency with Bush and Kerry, and you had the weird like Mormon, I guess Muslim tranny. I don't like Obama. I don't know really what's going on there. I'm just confused. But they always set up these strange kind of dialectic clashes there. And so you had like Trump and then ultimately Biden. And so like the only place where they really meet up anywhere in the world is in like Epstein's like black book. I don't want to get off for this because I love Trump. Or the Vatican. I love their family.
They meet there in the Vatican. They're both there to take their orders from the Pope.
Right, of course, absolutely. I guess they have to show up. I mean, if they didn't have to, they wouldn't, right? I mean,
that's right.
They don't just go places.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ever since we had ambassador to the Vatican with William Wilson under Ronald Reagan, then out of Malta. Wilson was also a Knight of Malta. Then there's always been all the presidents go to see him and pay homage to the Papa. Because if they don't, why maybe we'll cause a Great Depression, or maybe we'll just have you removed outright. Because I had a message today I put up on my website called Pope Leo XIII on what he really stands for. And I get into this, but I think you're listening.
What's your headline so we can plug it? We'll put it on the show notes there.
Pope Leo the 13th, what he really stands for.
Okay, you just said that twice. Okay, no problem. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay,
we'll
put it on there.
Doesn't matter how nice he is, or whatever he's Pope. Yeah, Leo the 14th. Pardon me. What does he stand for? And I get into nothing but the doctrine of the papacy. Doesn't matter if he's a nice man, whatever. This is what he stands for. I get into the 20 maxims of the Jesuits and what they have to say about making the Pope absolutely powerful, spiritual and temporal power, all of it. That's what he stands for. The law of the papacy has not changed. Every pope takes an oath to uphold the Council of Trent. And that was made evident in the Second Vatican Council in 1965. The Council of Trent, 25 sessions, is for the overthrow and the destruction of historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Western civilization. And they're about there.
Root and branch, even if it takes some centuries. That was the planning, and I think that was what the Counter-Reformation, and ultimately, if you look ahead in history, in the 1800s, when you had them get together in the Council of Vienna and all those meetings, they spent a lot of time there. They weren't just on vacation, right? And they were basically planning the next series of what you would say were the second 30 Years' Wars, which they were, apparently the world is completely duped, and the occult, like the hoodwink is totally pulled down tightly over their faces. They can't see what has happened as far as the world wars.
That's
and,
right.
The call for the third one, and God forbid it. I mean, I think that I worry about, like, especially Carney he's like the Bank of England guy who goes up in Canada. So they're going to move towards a unification of America, a removal of the Constitution, which, I mean, we're on emergency war powers, everything anyway. So, I mean, we can't even govern.
They really don't have to do that. They've already got the government that they want, so they can just leave the Constitution in place to keep the deception up that we're under some kind of limited government, when that's ridiculous. That's not the truth.
But we're definitely moving towards a North American Union concept, because
That's right.
And Trump virtually said that, talking about, and he has to, I don't know who left their eye off the ball down there in the canal anyway, the Panama Canal, if I'm saying that right. And also just going to Greenland and looking at Greenland like you're going to be like the staging base for a future invasion. So you might as well just become a part of the new, international bloc.
That's right. That's right. Empire builders are bloody murderers, like Hitler, like Stalin, like Mao. And empire builders are always run by the Jesuits because they run the dictators.
Yeah, I wanted to just thank you for spending time with us. We like to go to Forgotten Books too. I heard you talk about that before, and I always do a little plug for them because they're kind of fearless. They have every kind of book you can imagine. So
sure do. They republished Wiley's work, I believe. Kissinger's legacy reprints. You have that one, and then you have Kissinger's, and they reprinted the Jesuits by Wiley, which is really good.
Have you ever gone over to look at Internet Archive? Of course.
Oh, yeah. The problem is you can't download it. You can't make it a part of your computer. They make it so that you can't do that.
A lot of the pages that I look at, I can like right click and then it'll be like open as an image on like another, I'll open it as an image and save the pictures for the pages I need. But, you really can't download the entire thing though, right?
So you're also mentoring. That's the Kissinger's legacy. That's Staves and Suicide and John Wilkes Booth. I got that right here. But yeah, they're reprinting a lot of wonderful old books that have been suppressed. And if I ever had any money, I would give those book publishers all kinds of cash to republish all these different books so we can make them available to people that are interested.
What we should do is, if we have time, we should get together and I always think that not enough is being said or written or done to talk about Pope Francis there, Bergoglio, and how he came out of Argentina, and he was the archbishop there in Argentina for a long time, a Jesuit, if you will, and he was he would have overseen and known about the fact that so many Third Reich officials and high German Nazi officials, and probably likely, which was a huge secret, Hitler himself, would have lived out their years down there in Argentina, right? And they even found like Klaus Barbie. They found certain people down there, but they just never really. No one ever went over and just like pulled the curtain down and exposed the whole thing, right? They lived out their lives.
There's a book you want to get called Aftermath by Ladius Farrago. And it shows how Martin Bormann and other top Nazis were brought into Argentina, and he proves it in the book Aftermath. Yeah.
What was the author's name again? We'll add that in there as well.
Ladius Farrago.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, thank you very much for the hour again. We'll have to get together very shortly. It was a wonderful talk, and I hope that all of our listeners will go to VaticanAssassins.org and check out Brother Eric John Phelps' work over there, and it's fascinating. So thank you for your time, sir.
And I also have 24/7 World Radio, and
Absolutely.
If you go there to my archive programs, you can then listen to the post I put up today. It's EJP Hour 2, and I also put up some other posts of the past on the USS Liberty and how Francis Cardinal Spellman was behind all of that. So I think it would be a good read and a good listen for the listeners too.
Well, that's a good point. Would he be behind that in order to further stage this larger premise in history that somehow the Jews attacked the ship kind of concept?
Yeah, I mean,
Is that the point?
There's a 4-CD set called Sacrificing Liberty. I recommend everybody get it. And those sailors, genuine as they are, believe that it's Israel that did it and it's the Jews that did it. And I have done my best to help inform them that it was not the Jews. The government of Israel is run by the Pope through Washington. LBJ was behind that whole attack. It was not the people of Israel, not at all. So it was also Francis Cardinal Spellman. The Kennedy assassination was the overseer of the attack on USS Liberty. So I recommend your listeners listen to that. It's a two-part listen.
Fascinating. Thank you, sir. You have a wonderful night.
Okay, you too, Sean. Lord bless, and to your listeners too.
Lord bless.